You no longer chase validation because you finally understand your worth. Every ignored call, every unanswered message becomes a boundary knot. The silence you feared has become your strongest ally, not your enemy. They don't leave you anymore. You let them go before they arrive. You anticipate deception not with paranoia, but with inner clarity. That's what healing does. It sharpens your instincts and dulls your desperation. People who once had power over your peace now feel distant, not because they changed, but because your perception did. You removed their mask and saw only a reflection of your old wounds. No apology can fix what you now refuse to tolerate. Respect is no longer a request, it's a non-negotiable requirement. This new standard you've created, it's not arrogance, it's self. When people ask why you're distant, they don't know the storms you survived. They weren't there for the heartbreaks, the betrayals, the lies. Now, your distance isn't coldness, it's the temperature of clarity. You're not hard to love, you just stopped entertaining those who offer it cheaply. You refuse breadcrumbs because you've tasted the feast of self-respect. And those who can't meet you there, they disappear on their own. The ones who once hurt you aren't monsters, they were lessons in human disguise. They taught you not to hate, but to discern, to see clearly. Pain became the teacher that love could never be. You smile now not because life is easier, but because you're no longer at war with yourself. Peace doesn't require perfect circumstances, only a clear identity. And you finally remembered who you are beneath the scars. You stop explaining yourself to people who misunderstand your silence. Your stillness is no longer mistaken for weakness, but power. You are no longer available for chaos disguised as love. Your aura repels those who used to thrive in your confusion. People feel the shift, even if they can't name it. That's the beauty of boundaries. They speak without a single word. Not everyone who lost access to you deserves an explanation. Some were meant to exit at the door of your awakening. And you walked away without looking back. Forgiveness is not about the meats, about freeing yourself. You forgave, not to reconnect, but to reclaim your energy. And in that act, you became untouchable. They say time heals, but you know better. It's not time that's truth. It's clarity. It's remembering your worth. That's when the healing really begins. You no longer flinch at red flags. You notice them, name them, and exit quietly. Maturity is no longer entertaining what once excited your wounds. You understand now. People don't change. Patterns do. So you no longer hope they either align or they disappear. There is no space for potential in a life that demands peace. You became the person you needed when you were breaking. And that version of youth, the quiet, strong, unapologetic one, is staying. Not because life is easy, but because you finally found your center. The inner child no longer cries at the hands of neglect. They're held now by the adult version who chooses them every day. That's the ultimate heal in the reunion of self. Your presence is expensive now, not in ego, but in awareness. Not everyone deserves access to your evolved energy. And those who do, they never make you question your value. You're not better than anyone, you're just no longer for everyone. You stopped shrinking to be digestible. Now, you let people choke on your wholeness if they must. They can call it pride, bitterness, or coldness. But you know it's simply boundaries, finally honored. And in those boundaries, your soul breathes freely. Let them gossip, wonder, and fabricate stories. You no longer need to correct the misinformed. Truth doesn't need defense, it reveals itself in time. You stopped chasing closure when you realized it wasn't theirs to give. You gave it to yourself in silence, in stillness, in strength. And that's when everything changed. You're no longer triggered by what once shattered you. That's the mark of true healing, not forgetting, but transforming. You carry the scar, but not the weight. You are no longer afraid to be misunderstood, because truth doesn't beg for validation. It simply exists, and so do you, fully and freely. When you realize your power lies in your awareness, not in control, you begin to heal. No one outside of you has the ability to define your worth. This is where pain loses its grip and freedom quietly begins. Carl Jung believed that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Once you face your shadow, you stop bleeding on people who didn't cut you. You begin to see patterns, not as punishment, but as messages. The wounds from childhood are deep, not because of what happened, but because of what was never spoken. The silence, the absence, the neglected carves, deeper than words ever could. But once you name it, you tame it. You don't heal by pretending it didn't happen. You heal by giving it new meaning. Pain doesn't disappear, it transforms when seen through the eyes of understanding. And in that transformation, no one can ever hurt you the same way again. Every time you said, "I'm fine," when you weren't, your nervous system took the blow. But now you've stopped abandoning yourself to be understood by others. That is the rebirth of your emotional safety. When the soul matures, it no longer begs for closure. It simply walks away, knowing that silence is often the loudest form of self-respect. You stop knocking on doors that no longer open to your truth. Jung taught us that people project their own shadow onto others. So the insult wasn't about you, it was a mirror of their pain. You no longer internalize projections, you analyze them. The moment you realize you are not your thoughts, peace arrives. You become the observer, not the prisoner of your mind. Freedom is found in that separation. Some wounds aren't meant to be erased, but integrated. They become your compass, not your chains. Your scars don't define you, they remind you that you survived. What used to trigger you now teaches you. What used to break you now builds you. That's the transformation from pain to power. Forgiveness isn't about others, it's about your nervous system finally exhaling. When you forgive, you stop carrying weights that were never yours. That's when nobody can hurt you because you've let go. When you stop explaining yourself to those committed to misunderstanding you, you reclaim your time. Time is sacred energy. Even more so, now you invest in people who pour back into you. You no longer chase validation or generate it. You no longer fear solitude, you choose it. Because you've learned that peace is louder than applause. Not everyone deserves access to your vulnerability. Your energy is not public property. Boundaries don't push people away, they protect your peace. Carl Jung warned that until we deal with our own shadow, we remain susceptible to manipulation. Now that you've done the work, gaslighting no longer confuses you. You trust your perception over their persuasion. You used to react. Now you reflect. That pause between trigger and response is where maturity is born. And in that stillness, power gathers. Every painful memory has been alchemized into wisdom. Every heartbreak redirected you toward wholeness. You didn't just survive, you were initiated. There's a calm that enters when you stop being so available. Your no becomes a shield, your silence a sword. You finally understand. Not everything deserves a response. They thought your silence was weakness, but it was strategy. Not everyone deserves your truth, only those who can hold it. That's how you protect your inner kingdom. You're no longer interested in being liked. You're focused on being real. Authenticity scares them, but your truth is no longer up for compromise. You've stopped running from discomfort. Now you sit with it, drink tea with your shadows, and ask them what they need. That's how you became unshakable. The love you used to seek from others, you now give to yourself. The validation you crave, you now embody. That's the beginning of emotional independence. Jung believed healing comes from becoming whole, not perfect. So you've embraced your contradictions. You're both a masterpiece and a work in progress. You used to feel guilty for choosing yourself. Now you feel guilty when you don't. Self-abandonment is no longer an option. What used to control you no longer holds weight. You see the manipulation, the emotional hooks, the guilt trips, and you smile because you're untouchable where you once were reactive. Healing didn't make you soft. It made you sharp. You're no longer easily impressed or easily distressed. You know what peace costs, and you protect it. You've finally learned to sit with uncertainty. Not everything needs to be solved. Some things just need to be felt. And in that surrender, suffering dissolves. Not being available doesn't make you rude, it makes you wise. You've stopped being a lifeline to people who would let you drown, and that's how you learned to breathe again. They can't hurt you anymore because you've outgrown the version of yourself that allowed it. Your growth outpaced their access. And evolution becomes the best boundary. The armor you wear now is made of You've stopped outsourcing your intuition to others. That is your greatest protection. There comes a time when peace becomes your default setting, not chaos. Your nervous system no longer anticipates attack, it expects calm. That's when you know healing has rewritten your baseline. I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become. Carl Jung. This quote is not just an idea, it's an invitation to rise, to stop living in reaction and start responding from your highest self. The old you tolerated too much in the name of love. The new you sets boundaries in the name of because anything that costs your peace is too expensive. Every trigger was a messenger in disguise. It pointed you not toward them, but toward yourself. And in decoding the message, you disarmed the pain. Your visions will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. Carl Jung. You no longer look outside for answers that were always within. The mirror became your mentor. Letting go didn't weaken you, it redefined you. You stopped needing closure from those incapable of giving it. Now, silence is your closer, and clarity is your peace. The apology you waited for never came, and you're still healing. You made peace without validation. That is strength they'll never understand. You've started loving from overflow, not emptiness. No longer begging to be chosen because you choose yourself every day. That's how real self-worth is built, from the inside out. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Carl Jung. Now you rewrite the script, no longer a passive actor. You're the author, and the pen is finally in your hand. Now, being unbothered isn't apathy, it's alignment. You don't react to noise. You tune into peace because your energy is not for rent. You stopped seeing endings as losses. Now they are redirections, disguised as heartbreak. Ishno was the universe protecting your future. Knowing your own darkness is the best method for dealing with the darkness of other people. Carl Jung. That's why you don't take it personally anymore. Their hate is their wound talking, not your reflection. Healing doesn't mean you never feel hurt. It means you no longer live there. You visit, you feel, you release. The patterns repeated not because you were weak, but because your nervous system confused familiarity with safety. Now, you're reprogramming that instinct. You became dangerous the moment you stopped needing permission. Permission to feel, to walk away, to be enough. Because power lies in authenticity. People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. Carl Jung. You faced yours, and it broke you beautifully. Now you walk with depth others fear. The old version of you would have begged to stay. The healed version thanks them for leaving. Because absence creates space and space creates clarity. You now understand. Closure isn't something they give, it's something you claim. It lives in your decision to no longer wait for what's not coming. Peace is not passive, it's a choice. You used to fear solitude. Now you honor it like sacred ground. Because in stillness, you found yourself. The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. Carl Jung. And in that becoming, you had to lose illusions. Illusions of love, safety, and identity. You've stopped pouring into cracked cups. You no longer save people who drown you in the process. You've learned loyalty without boundaries is self-betrayal. They can no longer trigger you because you healed the wound they used to touch. You see manipulation as loud and obvious now. You meet it with silence and distance. What you used to call drama, you now call You name the trauma, track the pattern, and end the cycle. That's how generational healing begins with you. Your perception will become clear only when you can look into your soul. Carl Jung. That inner clarity silenced your external noise. Now your choices reflect your healing, not your history. You no longer lower your standards to avoid being alone. You raise them to honor how far you've come. Because the healed version of you requires different company. You've stopped over-explaining yourself to people who enjoy misunderstanding you. You've started protecting your peace like it's your birthright. And in doing so, you've become untouchable. Loneliness does not come from having no people around. but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important. Carl Jung, now you seek depth, not numbers. One true connection outweighs 1,000 shallow ones. You used to chase answers. Now you sit with questions, because not knowing is part of knowing. They can't shame you anymore, because you've owned your story. What once made you hide now makes you shine. Your scars have become sacred. One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. Carl Jung, that's why you went into the storm. And in doing so, became the calm. You're no longer triggered by their absence. You're anchored in your presence, because healing taught you to be your own home. No longer waiting for someone to rescue you. You've become your own savior, and that kind of self-trust is unshakable. They can't hurt you anymore because the version of you they hurt no longer exists. You've outgrown the space where pain lived, and that growth is your greatest revenge. You no longer see pain as punishment. Instead, you recognize it as a form of initiation. It was never meant to destroy you, but to awaken parts of you that comfort never could. You've finally accepted the invitation to grow, even through discomfort. Man needs difficulties. They are necessary for health, Carl Jung once said. Every painful moment carved wisdom into your spirit. Not by accident, but by design. You've realized suffering didn't define you, it refined you. You've stopped asking, why did this happen to me? And started asking, what is this trying to teach me? That shift alone turned your wounds into sacred lessons. You became your own healer by transforming pain into power. You've learned that walking away doesn't mean giving up, it means choosing peace over chaos. Winning no longer means being right. It means being free. You've traded your need for validation with the need for inner stillness. You didn't heal by pretending to be okay. You healed by confronting what shattered you. Carl Jung reminded us, we cannot change anything until we accept it. And that's exactly what you did. You accepted and alchemized. You once felt broken and ashamed of your cracks, but now you see them as entry points for light. The heartbreak wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something far more authentic. You were never falling apart. You were breaking open. The world told you to numb your feelings and bury the hurt, but you chose the opposite. You chose to feel every ounce of it, even when it burned. That decision didn't make you weak. It made you free. You've stopped explaining your growth to those who prefer the old, broken version of you. Some people only understand you when you're in pain because your strength threatens their comfort. You no longer shrink for their approval. The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely, Jung warned. But you did it anyway. In solitude and silence, you met yourself without filters or fire, and you embraced what you found. You stopped bleeding for people who wouldn't even offer you a bandage. Now, your boundaries speak louder than your explanations. You've learned that protecting your energy is not selfish, it's sacred. You've learned that love should never feel like anxiety. Attachment taught you confusion, but healing taught you clarity. Now, you only open your heart to what feels safe, soft, and sure. You no longer use projection to deflect your pain, you use reflection to understand it. Carl Jung said, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. You've taken that truth and used it to evolve. The past no longer has a grip on you because you've outgrown the version of you who stayed stuck in it. You don't need revenge. Your glow is your answer. Becoming unbothered is the best closure. Silence used to haunt you, but now it heals you. In the stillness, you found yourself. The quiet that once scared you became the very place you rebuilt your peace. They tried to drown you in confusion, but you found clarity through chaos. You were never weak. You were just temporarily hidden beneath noise. Now your presence feels like thunder wrapped in calm. In all chaos there is a cosmos. In all disorder, a secret order, said Jung. What once felt like destruction now feels like divine direction. The storm didn't come to punish you, it came to purify you. You stopped overcommitting just to keep people around. Pleasing others cost you your peace, and you're no longer paying that price. You realized that abandoning yourself is the worst kind of betrayal. You stopped chasing shallow validation and began searching for soul-deep resonance. You don't crave attention, you crave alignment. Surface-level connections can no longer satisfy you. Your heart cleared when you stopped waiting for someone else to choose you. You chose yourself, and that choice changed everything. Jung said, your vision will become clear only when you look into your heart, and now you see it all. Your triggers have become your teachers, and your scars have become map. You don't hide your past, you honor it as the birthplace of your strength. What used to control you now guides you. People can no longer manipulate the version of you who knows who they are. Clarity is your compass, and confusion no longer clouds your decisions. You are fluent in your own worth. You stopped falling in love with potential. Now, you fall in love with presence. You've learned that hope without truth is just the greatest tragedy of the family is the unlived lives of the parents, Jung observed. You broke cycles, not by fighting them, but by choosing differently. You lived the life they were too afraid to imagine. They thought their absence would leave you empty, but it gave you space to grow. You're no longer waiting for an apology. You're living like you deserve one. You're not looking for someone to save you anymore. You became your own sanctuary. The storm inside you didn't destroy you, it built a shelter for your soul. The shoe that fits one person pinches another, said Jung. You stopped trying to fit into roles that weren't made for you. Now, you walk your own path, and it fits perfectly. Forgiveness no longer feels like weakness, it feels like freedom. You let go. Not for them, but for you. You stopped carrying weight that was never yours to begin with. Your growth is no longer loud, it's steady and sacred. You've become softer, not smaller. You've outgrown the drama, not because you're cold, but because you're clear. A man who has not passed